The sun had barely risen over Aja, and already a small crowd gathered around a wooden stall by the roadside. The stall was humble. No signboard, no paint, no generator. Just a smoky coal stove, a plastic table, and the sweet smell of hope. Behind the stall stood Sophia Okafor, a slim 7-year-old girl with smooth dark skin and neatly braided hair tied with colorful beads. Standing on a small stool to reach the pan, her tiny hands worked with surprising skill, turning noodles in a large black pot. The smell pulled people from every corner: drivers, students with worn backpacks, market women with heavy baskets, even civil servants in pressed shirts. Beside her, her mother, Grace Okafor, peeled boiled eggs, her face tired but proud. Every morning she watched Sophia cook with a focus far beyond her years. Customers didn't just come for the noodles. They came for Sophia's discipline. She had one rule: only 20 plates a day, not 21. This morning was no different. "Please, small madam," a sweaty man at the front of the line begged, waving cash. "I'll pay 10,000. Just give me one extra plate." Sophia didn't look up from her pan. Her voice was polite but firm. "Sorry, uncle. Only 20. You came late." The crowd chuckled. Another woman in high heels pushed forward, irritation in her voice. "This is nonsense. I won't queue behind all these people. How much do you want? Name your price." Sophia looked at her gently, then shook her head. "Auntie, even if you give me your car, it's still 20 plates." The crowd burst into applause and laughter. Grace added softly, "Please, everyone, let's respect the queue. If you don't get today, come early tomorrow." There was something about Sophia's stall that went beyond food. Her noodles carried peace, her smile carried kindness, and her honesty carried integrity. Eating here felt like sitting at home, like being seen, like being human in a city that often forgot kindness. By mid-morning, the pot was empty. 20 plates, not one more. Sophia wiped her little hands on a towel, helped Grace pack up the table, and flashed a smile that made strangers' burdens feel lighter. What she didn't know was that across the road, a sleek black SUV had been parked the whole time. Behind its tinted glass sat Edward Walker, CEO of Walker Innovations. A billionaire, polished in every suit, respected across Nigeria, yet broken inside. He hadn't eaten a full meal in 3 years, ever since tragedy ripped his life apart. Doctors had called it trauma-induced anorexia. Chefs had tried, therapists had begged, but food had become tasteless, meaningless. Until now. The smell drifting from Sophia's stall wasn't just food, it was memory. Safety. Home. Without a word, Edward stepped out of his SUV. The crowd gasped as whispers spread. "Isn't that Edward Walker?" But he ignored them. He joined the back of the line, his calm eyes fixed only on Sophia. But when he reached the stall, Sophia shook her head. "Sorry, sir. Noodles is finished." Edward paused, disappointment heavy in his chest. For reasons he didn't understand, her words stung more than hunger ever had. He turned to leave, but Sophia giggled softly. "Wait, I saved one plate. For someone special. I think it's you." Grace froze. Her heart skipped as her eyes landed on the man she once loved, the man she had kept away from for years. Edward sat on the wooden bench, and for the first time in years he ate. Bite after bite, silently, desperately, until the plate was empty. His eyes glistened with something he hadn't felt in years: life. "Daddy, you really like it?" Sophia asked innocently. Edward blinked. "What did you call me?" "Daddy," she said again, beaming. "You look like one." The word pierced him like sunlight through a storm. For the first time in years, Edward Walker wasn't just a billionaire or a broken man. For a brief, trembling moment, he felt like he belonged. That night, back in his glass-walled penthouse on Victoria Island, Edward Walker sat by the window staring at the glittering skyline. Plates of gourmet meals sat untouched on the marble counter behind him, but he couldn't stop thinking about the little stall in Aja, about the girl who called him Daddy, about the food that finally reached a part of him no doctor or chef could touch. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, the emptiness inside didn't feel bottomless. The next morning, Edward returned. By the time his SUV rolled up, most of Sophia's noodles were gone, but when she saw him, her face lit up. "You came back," she said, her small voice filled with delight. "I did," Edward replied, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "Is there any left for me?" Sophia pointed proudly to a small plate she had set aside. "Your plate is waiting." Edward sat again on the wooden bench. The world around him, the traffic, the noise, the whispers, faded as he lifted the fork. Bite after bite, he ate slowly, savoring each taste. It wasn't just food, it was healing. As he finished, he looked around. "Where's your mom?" he asked gently. Sophia glanced toward the small house behind the stall. "She stepped out," she said innocently. What she didn't know was that Grace was inside, behind the thin curtain, her heart racing. She couldn't bring herself to step outside. Not yet. Not when the man she had once loved, the man who never knew she carried his child, was sitting only a few feet away. Every day that week, Edward came back. Sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the evening. He didn't demand, he didn't boast. He simply ate. And every time, Sophia saved him a plate. Over time, Sophia grew attached to him. She wouldn't serve anyone until she had set aside his portion. She chatted with him as though they had known each other forever. "Why do you like me so much?" Edward asked one evening, handing her a bottle of water. Sophia shrugged, her eyes sparkling. I don't know. You feel nice, like you care. Like you're mine." Edward chuckled softly. "Like I'm yours?" Sophia stood tall on her little toes. "Yes, like you're supposed to be in my life." The words shook something deep inside him. He didn't know how to explain it, but being around Sophia made him feel whole in a way that billion-dollar deals never had. That evening, as the last customers left, Edward stayed behind to help Sophia wipe the bench. He noticed something glimmering on her wrist, a faded gold bracelet, cracked with age. His chest tightened. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice trembling. Sophia looked down at the bracelet casually. "This? It's mine. Mummy says it's lucky. It's always been with me." Edward froze. He knew that bracelet. He had the exact same one, a family heirloom passed down by his grandmother. His was in his drawer at home, carefully preserved. The pair had been a symbol of love he once shared with Grace. Now here it was, on the wrist of a little girl who called him Daddy. His heart began to pound. Could it be? That night, Edward lay awake staring at the wooden box in his bedroom. Inside, his matching bracelet gleamed under the dim light. His mind filled with memories. Grace laughing barefoot on the sands of Tarqua Bay, her voice carried by the wind, their promises of forever. She had left without a word. But what if she hadn't left alone? For the first time, Edward whispered a truth he had long buried. What if Sophia is mine? The next morning at the stall, Sophia stirred noodles, as usual, her braids bouncing as she worked. Grace sat beside her, peeling eggs, but her eyes were restless. For days she had hidden behind curtains whenever Edward appeared. For days she had listened to Sophia laugh with him, call him Daddy, and save him a plate as though it was their unspoken bond. Grace's heart burned with questions she wasn't ready to answer. Edward, meanwhile, couldn't get the image of the bracelet out of his mind. That morning, as Sophia served him, he knelt beside her and gently took her wrist. "Sophia, who gave you this?" he asked softly. Sophia smiled as if the answer was obvious. "Mummy. She said it's always been mine. She says it's lucky." Edward's chest tightened. He stared at the cracked gold, the exact twin of the bracelet in his drawer. His hands trembled as memory after memory flooded back. How he had once given the matching piece to Grace on a beach 8 years ago, whispering that it symbolized their future together. And now it was here, on the wrist of the little girl who called him Daddy. That night, Edward sat in his penthouse staring at his bracelet. He opened the wooden box and held it against the window light. Side by side they were identical, same curves, same faded inscription on the inside. It wasn't coincident. It couldn't be. He whispered to himself, "She's mine. She has to be mine." Meanwhile, in their cramped Aja apartment, Grace folded washed clothes in silence. Sophia played with her doll in the corner, but her bright eyes never left her mother. "Mummy?" she said softly. "Yes, baby? Why are you running away from that man?" Grace froze, the shirt in her hands trembling. "Running? Who's running?" She tried to laugh. "You, Mummy. Every time he comes, you hide." Grace forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm just tired, Sophia, that's all." But Sophia stood, her little voice steady. "Mummy, that man is my daddy." Grace's hands dropped. Her breath caught in her throat. She wanted to laugh it off, to dismiss it. "Don't say such things. Just because he eats your noodles doesn't make him your father." But Sophia shook her head. "I don't know how I know, I just know." Grace turned away quickly, pressing a piece of cloth to her chest, blinking back tears. She couldn't tell her daughter the truth, not yet. Not when she still carried the hurt of being abandoned. Not when she wasn't ready to face the man who had broken her heart. At this morning, sunlight spilled across the Aja roadside as Sophia stirred her pot, steam rising like a crown over her head. The crowd gathered as always, eager for their share of the 20 plates. Grace sat beside her, pretending calm, though her heart thudded. She knew it was only a matter of time before Edward asked the question she had been avoiding for 8 long years. And that morning he did. Edward stepped from his SUV, dressed in a plain shirt instead of his usual tailored suit. There was no barrier of wealth between him and the stall. He greeted Sophia warmly, took his plate, and sat on the same wooden bench, but his eyes kept drifting toward Grace. When the last customer left and Sophia bent over to wipe the table, Edward rose and approached. "Grace." Her hands froze on the basket of eggs. She had prayed he wouldn't say her name aloud, but now it hung in the air between them, like lightning before a storm. Slowly, she lifted her eyes. It was him, the man she had once loved so deeply, the man she had once trusted with her future. "I need to know," Edward said, his voice low but firm. "Is Sophia my daughter?" The world seemed to stop. Grace's lips parted, then closed again. Her eyes shimmered with pain. She wanted to tell the truth, but the wound of his absence burned fresh. "No," she whispered finally. Edward blinked. "Grace." "She's not yours," Grace said louder, forcing steel into her voice. "After we separated, I met someone else. He wanted to marry me, but he died before Sophia was born. That's the truth." Edward's chest tightened. His eyes searched her face, but all he saw was a wall. "If that's true," he said slowly, "then why does she have my bracelet?" Grace looked away, her breath unsteady. "It's just a bracelet. You gave it to me. I gave it to her, nothing more." Edward's jaw clenched. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to respect her words. But something in his soul whispered otherwise. He sighed, his voice heavy. "I'm not here to force anything, Grace. If you say she isn't mine, I'll respect that. But I know what I felt when I saw her, and I've never felt that way before." He turned to leave, his footsteps slow, carrying the weight of 8 lost years. Grace stood frozen, her fists clenched at her sides, her heart pounding with truths too heavy to confess. Inside, Sophia peeked from the doorway, confusion clouding her innocent face. She didn't understand all the words, but she knew one thing. Her heart told her Edward was her father. And nothing, Grace said, could silence that truth. Time. Edward stood by his window overlooking Victoria Island's glittering skyline. The city pulsed with life, but his mind was at that tiny stall in Aja, with Sophia, with Grace. He clenched the bracelet in his palm and whispered, "I need answers, and this time, I won't walk away." The dust from Edward's SUV had barely settled when another vehicle pulled up, a shiny black Jeep with tinted windows. The crowd of customers murmured, sensing trouble. Out stepped Chef Bamidel Johnson, crisp in his starched white jacket, his heavy frame cutting a proud silhouette. He looked around with a mocking smirk. "So this is the so-called magic stall. This is where Lagos forgets its restaurants and lines up like beggars." Sophia froze mid-stir, her small hands tightening around the spoon. Grace rose slowly, her jaw set. "Good morning, sir. Can we help you?" "Help me?" Bamidel scoffed. "I'm here to help you, or rather, to shut this down." He raised his voice so the crowd could hear. "A child cooking unsupervised? No license, no hygiene certificate, no safety approval. This is illegal, a public health risk." The crowd gasped. Sophia's eyes widened. "But I wash my hands every time," she whispered. "Oh, please," Bamidel sneered. "What does a little girl like you know about kitchen safety? This is not cooking. This is street nonsense. You don't belong in the food business." Tears pricked Sophia's eyes, but Grace stepped forward. Her voice steady, though her heart trembled. "She is not alone. I am always here with her. She was born with this gift, and I guide her." The crowd murmured in support, but Bamidel raised his hand sharply, motioning to 2 assistants stepping out of the Jeep. "Pack it up," he ordered. "Close this place before someone dies of food poisoning." Sophia's stirring stopped. Her small shoulders shook as if the weight of her little world was about to collapse. Then a calm, commanding voice cut through the chaos. "Excuse me," Edward Walker said, stepping forward. The crowd turned. Murmurs rippled. It's him, the billionaire. Edward's presence shifted the air. Dressed simply, he didn't need a suit to command authority. He looked Bamidel square in the eye. "I eat here every day," he said firmly, "and I have never been sick, not once. In fact, this is the only food my body accepts." The crowd erupted in whispers of surprise. Edward continued. "Unless you are the health inspector, you have no right to bully a child and her mother. If you have a problem with their success, perhaps you should focus on improving your own kitchen instead of trying to crush theirs." Bamidel faltered, sweat beading on his brow as the people nodded in agreement. His assistants lowered their hands uncertainly. "You think this is over?" he hissed, retreating toward his Jeep. "We'll see." The vehicle sped off, leaving dust behind. Sophia exhaled shakily. The crowd clapped, cheering Edward's defense. Grace turned to him, her eyes soft but conflicted. For the first time in years, they looked at each other not as strangers, but as 2 people bound by something deeper than pride. Bound by a child and by a truth neither of them could keep buried forever. And in that silence, Sophia tugged Edward's sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered shyly. I want to cook for you forever. Edward's chest ached. He bent down, his voice thick. That means more to me than you know. Grace turned away quickly, her heart torn. She knew the storm with Bamidel wasn't over, but the storm inside her between truth and denial was even greater. 2 quiet days passed after the confrontation. Sophia kept cooking, her little hands steady and her laughter bright. But Grace could see the shadow of fear in her eyes. She worried Bamidel's threats weren't over, and she was right. On the 3rd morning, the black jeep returned. But this time, Chef Bamidel stepped out alone. No shouting, no entourage. Just a smirk that unsettled the air. The crowd stiffened, ready for trouble, but Bamidel raised his hands. Relax. I didn't come to fight. I came with, a challenge. He dropped a colorful flyer on the wooden table. Bold letters flashed across it. Culinary King Clash Season 5, gasps rippled through the line. It was Nigeria's most prestigious cooking competition, televised nationwide, judged by celebrity chefs, watched by millions. Bamidel's eyes fixed on Sophia. You think you're good? Let's see how good. Enter this competition. Cook against professionals. If you're as talented as people claim, prove it. The crowd buzzed with excitement. A child in the Culinary King Clash. Some laughed at the idea. Others whispered, maybe she could win. Sophia's eyes sparkled with curiosity. Is that real? She whispered. Very real, Bamidel said, his smile sharp. But I doubt a little girl can survive a professional kitchen. Do yourself a favor. Stay here with your gutter stall. He turned and left, his words hanging like smoke in the air. That evening, Sophia sat cross-legged on the floor of their small Aja apartment, the flyer clutched in her hands. She looked up at Edward, who had come by after closing hours. Uncle Edward, she said, her voice trembling with both fear and excitement. Do you think I should try? Edward studied the flyer, his jaw tightening. Sophia, this is big. It's national. Cameras pressure, judges who don't show mercy. Are you sure you want this? Sophia nodded, her little face set with determination. I may be small, but my food has something special. I want people to feel it. I want to make the world taste hope. Grace leaned in the doorway, her heart heavy. She wanted to say no. She wanted to keep her daughter safe from ridicule, from exploitation, from being swallowed by a world that only cared about fame. But the light in Sophia's eyes was one she hadn't seen in years. Edward met Grace's gaze. His voice was gentle. I'll sponsor her. Registration, transport, equipment, everything she needs. Let her try. Grace's lips parted to object, but the sight of Sophia clutching the flyer tightly, her eyes glowing with dreams too big for Aja, silenced her. Slowly, Grace nodded. That night, as Sophia fell asleep with the flyer beside her pillow, Grace pulled out an old photo album. She opened to a faded picture of a man in a chef's uniform. This was your grandfather, she whispered to the sleeping child. He cooked for kings. His food healed hearts. And now, your gift lives on. Grace's eyes filled with tears. Sophia was no longer just a street chef. She was stepping into a bigger world, one that could expose her, or one that could crown her. Either way, nothing would ever be the same again. From the next morning, life at the small wooden stall changed. Sophia no longer cooked just for her 20 loyal plates. She was preparing for something much bigger. She woke earlier than usual, tying her little apron around her waist with a determined knot. Grace watched her daughter with both pride and fear. The child who once cooked to survive was now training to compete with the nation's best. Today, Grace said gently, placing onions and peppers on the table, we go beyond noodles. Sophia's eyes widened. What will we cook? Everything, Grace replied. Rice, yam porridge, puff-puff, agouti, plantain. If you are going to face real chefs, you must know more than one dish. You must know your roots. So they began. Day after day, Sophia's tiny hands learned to slice vegetables with precision, to season meat with patience, to taste soup with just the tip of her tongue. Grace guided her carefully, passing down the secrets her own father, Sophia's grandfather, had once used when cooking for kings. Food is not just for the stomach, Grace reminded her. It is for the heart. Cook with love, and even the toughest judge will feel it. Sophia nodded, her braids bouncing as she stirred. I will make Grandpa proud. Edward kept his distance, but his presence was always there. He arrived with new aprons, measuring spoons, a small blender, and a set of clean stainless pots. He didn't interfere, but every evening he returned to taste Sophia's dishes, his quiet smile telling her more than words could. You're improving, he said one night, after finishing a bowl of smoky jollof rice. I have eaten in 5-star hotels across the world, but nothing has ever tasted this alive. Sophia giggled. Because I cook with heart. Grace turned away, hiding the storm in her chest. Edward's encouragement was helping Sophia blossom, but it was also drawing him closer to the daughter he didn't yet know was his. Not everyone believed in Sophia's dream. Neighbors whispered. Some laughed at the idea of a 7-year-old competing against adults on live television. She should be playing with dolls, not pots, one man scoffed at the market. They're just using her for drama, another muttered. But the Culinary King Clash organizers silenced critics in a press release. Our competition has no age limit. Talent is not tied to age. Let the food speak. When Edward showed Sophia the statement, her eyes shone. See, Mummy? They believe in me? Grace sighed, pulling her daughter into a hug. I believe in you, too. I don't want the world to hurt you. Sophia rested her head against her mother's shoulder. I'll be okay, Mummy, as long as I have you. That night, long after Sophia had gone to bed, Grace sat awake with Edward outside the stall. The street was quiet, only the faint hum of distant traffic. You're giving her hope, Grace whispered. But hope is dangerous if it fails. Edward looked at her, his voice steady. Grace, this isn't just about food. It's about destiny. You can't hide her light. The world needs to see it. Grace turned away, her eyes glistening. She knew he was right. But letting Sophia shine meant opening doors to truths she had kept locked for years. Truths Edward would one day demand to face. The Culinary King Clash. Arena in Abuja was nothing like Sophia's wooden stall in Aja. Bright spotlights swept across the mass hall. Stainless steel counters gleamed under the cameras, and rows of judges with arms folded, their sharp eyes scanning every contestant. Contestants in crisp white aprons moved quickly, knives flashing, pans sizzling. And in the middle of it all stood Sophia Okafor. Barely tall enough to reach her counter, her braids tied back neatly, her tiny apron pressed against her frame. She placed a small hand-drawn picture of herself and her mother in the corner of her station, a quiet reminder of where she came from. Grace sat in the audience, her fingers interlocked tightly. Beside her, Edward leaned forward, his expression unreadable, though his heart raced faster than any business deal had ever made it. At the far end of the hall, Chef Bamadel Johnson crossed his arms and smirked. He hadn't forgotten the humiliation on the streets of Aja, and today he planned to bury Sophia under the weight of professional competition. A bell rang. The host's voice boomed through the speakers. Contestants, you have 1 hour to prepare a dish that represents your roots, something that tells your story. Your time begins now. Knives clattered. Flames hissed. The hall erupted into motion. Sophia opened her bag and froze. Her tomatoes were rotten. Her seasoning cubes were missing. The small meat pack she had carried had gone sour. Her little chest rose and fell rapidly. Whispers spread in the audience. Judges exchanged looks. Bamidel glanced her way with a sly grin. Grace leapt halfway to her feet, panic in her eyes. "They sabotaged her!" she cried under her breath. Edward clenched his fists, his knuckles white. Sophia's eyes welled, but then she closed them, hearing her mother's voice in her heart. "Food is not just for the stomach, Sophia. It is for the heart. Cook with love, and they will feel it." She took a deep breath, turned away from her spoiled ingredients, and looked at the back shelf where leftover supplies sit. A bowl of gari, some onions, a little flour, leftover rice. Nothing fancy, nothing impressive. But enough. She set to work, her small hands moving quickly, her face calm. She seasoned the rice gently with onions and spices she borrowed from the common rack. She mashed it into a soft filling, folded it with flour, and shaped tiny meat pies, only these weren't ordinary pies. She molded them into the shapes of little rabbits, playful and warm, like food meant for a child's table. The audience leaned in. Even the judges raised their brows. Time ticked down. Sophia plated her creation, setting the rabbit-shaped pies neatly beside a small garnish of gari flakes, sprinkled like golden dust. She wiped her station clean just as the bell rang. "Time's up." The judges approached. They looked at the small pies with a curiosity. One lifted a fork, broke open the crust, and tasted. The hall fell silent. His stern face softened. He nodded slowly. "This tastes like home." Another judge added, "It's not just food, it's comfort, it's courage." The audience erupted into applause. Grace pressed her hand to her mouth, tears flooding her eyes. Edward exhaled heavily, pride swelling in his chest. Across the arena, Bamidel's smile faltered. For the first time he realized this little girl was more than a street chef. She was a storm he could not stop. And Sophia, her tiny chest rising and falling, whispered to herself as the cheers washed over her, "I can do this." The applause still echoed in Sophia's ears long after the judges left her station. She had not only survived her first test, she had turned sabotage into triumph. Cameras swirled around her, flashes lighting her small frame as the audience rose to their feet. "Who is she?" reporters whispered. "A 7-year-old? From Aja?" Clips of her rabbit-shaped pies began to trend online within hours. Hashtags lit up. #Sophia the Street Chef. #Food with Heart. #Small but Mighty. Across Nigeria, homes buzzed with disbelief and pride. Some mocked, "It's just a gimmick. She'll fail in the next round." But many more celebrated her courage, saying, "If a child can face giants and win, then maybe we all can." Back in the contestants' lounge, Sophia sat swinging her legs from a high stool, holding her mother's hand tightly. Grace tried to smile, but her heart was still heavy. Her daughter had entered a bigger world, one filled not just with applause, but also with enemies. Edward approached, his tall frame casting a calm shadow. He crouched to Sophia's level, his voice low but warm. "You are incredible today. Do you know how brave you are?" Sophia giggled, brushing her braids back. "I just cooked with love, like Mummy said." Edward's chest ached at her words. Every day he grew more certain she wasn't just any child. She was his. Grace noticed the way he looked at Sophia, the tenderness in his eyes, the pride he didn't bother to hide. She turned away, afraid that one day soon the truth would break through the walls she had built. That night in their small Abuja hotel room provided by the competition, Grace brushed Sophia's hair by the dim bulb. The little girl's head leaned against her chest, tired but content. "Mummy," Sophia whispered, "did Grandpa really cook for kings?" Grace smiled softly, memories of her late father filling her heart. "Yes, baby. He cooked not just with skill, but with soul. And you have that same gift. It's in your blood." Sophia's eyes grew dreamy. "Then I'll make him proud." Grace kissed her forehead, holding her tighter. She wanted to protect her from the weight of the world, from heartbreak, from truth. But she also knew her daughter's light was too bright to be hidden any longer. Meanwhile, Edward sat alone in his suite, staring at the matching bracelet in his palm. His reflection in the glass wall stared back, haunted yet determined. 8 years ago, Grace had disappeared, taking with her the love he thought was forever. Now fate had brought them together again with a child who carried his smile, his laughter, even his family's heirloom. "She's mine," he whispered into the silence. "I know she is." And for the first time in years, Edward felt a new hunger not for food, but for family. But in the shadows, Chef Bamidel plotted. Humiliated once, he refused to be humiliated again. "If the judges won't break her," he muttered, pacing his hotel room, "then I will. Next round, that girl will fall." The Culinary King Clash had only just begun, and already the battle lines were drawn. A child with courage, a mother with secrets, a father with questions, and an enemy with vengeance. Sophia had lit a spark. Now the fire was spreading. The second round of the Culinary King Clash buzzed with even greater energy. The audience doubled, reporters packed the front rows, and hashtags blazed across social media. All eyes were on the little girl from Aja, who had defied the odds in round 1. "Contestants," the host announced, "today you must create a dish that balances tradition and innovation. You have 90 minutes. Your time starts now." Knives clanged, flames roared, contestants moved like warriors in battle. At her station, Sophia Okafor tied her apron tighter, her tiny face full of focus. She planned to make yam porridge with a twist, infusing it with herbs her grandfather once used in the palace kitchens. Grace's words echoed in her heart. "Cook with soul, and they will taste your story." But trouble was waiting. While Sophia bent down to retrieve her pot, Chef Bamidel Johnson passed behind her station. With one quick hidden motion, he loosened the gas connection on her burner. By the time Sophia returned, her flames sputtered weakly, refusing to rise. Panic gripped her chest. The judges glanced her way. Whispers rippled through the hall. Cameras zoomed in, catching her small hands trembling as she tried to relight the flame. Grace rose half out of her seat, fear tightening her throat. "They've tampered with her stove," she whispered urgently. Edward placed a steady hand on her arm. His jaw was tight, but his voice was calm. "Wait. Let's see what she does." Sophia's eyes watered. The yam porridge she dreamed of making was slipping away with every second lost. Other contestants raced ahead, aromas of jollof and pepper soup filling the air. She could almost hear Bamidel's mocking laughter behind her. But then she remembered something Edward had told her days ago. Courage is not about having everything. It's about creating with what you have left. Her tiny fists clenched. She looked around. In the back pantry, she spotted an old cast-iron pan and a bundle of firewood meant for display. Without hesitation, she dragged them to her station. With the help of a spark, she built a small wood fire right there in her counter's corner. Smoke curled into the air. The audience gasped. "She's cooking on firewood." "In a modern kitchen?" one judge exclaimed. Sophia bent low, blowing gently until the flames licked high. She diced onions, pounded pepper with her small mortar, and began stirring her porridge in the heavy pan. Sweat dripped down her face, but her movements were steady, purposeful. The smell rose, rich, smoky, full of history. It carried the essence of village hearths, of ancestors, of resilience. It carried her roots. When the timer rang, Sophia plated her dish carefully. Golden yam, soft but firm, swirled with herbs and a smoky aroma that filled the judge's table. The head judge tasted, closed his eyes, and smiled. This reminds me of my grandmother's kitchen. Simple, bold, unforgettable. This is what it means to honor tradition while creating something new. Applause thundered through the arena. The crowd rose to their feet, chanting her name. Sophia, Sophia, Sophia. Grace's tears streamed freely, pride bursting from her chest. Edward clapped slowly, his eyes never leaving the little girl who had not just survived sabotage, but turned it into triumph. Across the hall, Bamido's face darkened. His sabotage had failed again. This child was proving unstoppable. That night, as Sophia rested her head on her mother's lap, Grace whispered through tears, "You're stronger than I ever imagined." Sophia looked up sleepily. "I'm strong because I have you, Mummy, and—" She glanced at Edward, who sat quietly nearby. "Because I have him, too." Grace's heart squeezed. The truth she had fought to bury was breaking through, piece by piece, and soon, she knew, she would no longer be able to hold it back. The arena buzzed with Sophia's name long after the second round ended. Commentators called her the miracle child of Aja. Videos of her cooking on firewood in a modern kitchen spread across Nigeria like wildfire. But behind the applause, tension simmered. Grace could feel it in every glance Edward gave her, in every moment. Sophia looked at him with innocent devotion. She knew it was only a matter of time before the truth boiled over. That evening, the three of them sat together in the quiet Abuja hotel lobby. Sophia was curled up on a couch, sketching little drawings of pots and spoons while humming to herself. Edward leaned closer to Grace, his voice low but unyielding. "Grace, we can't keep circling this. That bracelet, her eyes, her spirit, it's all too clear. Sophia is mine, isn't she?" Grace's chest tightened. She turned her face away, blinking hard. "Edward, please, let it go." "I can't," he said, his tone sharp with years of bottled pain. "For 8 years I've lived in emptiness. And now I've found a little girl who heals me with every meal. Don't tell me that's coincidence." Grace's eyes filled. The weight of secrets pressed on her chest like a stone. "You left me," she whispered bitterly. "When I needed you most, you weren't there. I waited, I hoped, but you disappeared." Edward shook his head, hurt flashing across his face. "No, Grace, you disappeared. I searched. I called. I begged for answers, but you were gone. Do you know how many nights I lay awake, wondering why?" Grace's lips trembled. She wanted to argue, but the truth was tangled with old wounds and pride. From the couch, Sophia looked up innocently, clutching her sketchbook. "Why are you both sad?" The adults froze, their emotions spilling in silence. Edward forced a smile, kneeling by Sophia's side. "We're not sad, little chef. We're just remembering." But Sophia tilted her head, her young eyes piercing through walls adults thought were unbreakable. "Daddy," she said softly, "why don't you just tell Mummy you love her? Then she won't be afraid anymore." Grace gasped. Edward's breath caught. The child had spoken the truth they were both too afraid to admit. The next day, the third round of the competition loomed. Sophia walked onto the shining stage as chants of her name filled the arena. But behind the glow of cameras, the storm between her parents swirled hotter than ever. Grace sat in the audience, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles whitened. Edward sat beside her, his gaze locked not just on Sophia, but on Grace. It was no longer just about food. It was about healing broken bonds. It was about a child who unknowingly carried the power to stitch together a family torn apart by silence. As Sophia lifted her ladle and the bell rang, Edward whispered to Grace, almost like a vow, "No more lies. When this is over, we face the truth, together." Grace's heart pounded. She couldn't reply. Not yet. But in her silence, she knew. The moment was coming. The truth would no longer stay hidden. The Culinary King Clash arena pulsed with electricity. This was the final round, the moment that would crown a champion. Cameras zoomed in, lights blazed, and the crowd roared as contestants took their stations. On her little stool at the counter stood Sophia Okafor, apron tied tightly, her small hand resting firmly on the wooden ladle. She looked tiny among the towering chefs in white, yet her presence filled the room. "Final challenge," the host declared. "Prepare a dish that tells the story of who you are. You have 90 minutes. Begin!" Flames leapt to life. Knives clattered. The air filled with sizzling and the sharp rhythm of chopping. At her station, Sophia closed her eyes for a moment. She wasn't thinking of the judges or the cameras or the shouting crowd. She was thinking of Aja, of 20 plates a day, of her mother peeling eggs, of Edward sitting on the wooden bench, eating as though food had saved his soul. When she opened her eyes, her decision was clear. She would make her noodles, simple, smoky, filled with the taste of home, the dish that carried her story, her heart, her roots. She worked quickly, her little fingers precise, her braids swaying with each movement. She boiled, stirred, seasoned, and plated with love. Around her, other chefs scrambled with exotic dishes, duck confit, seafood risotto, spiced lamb. Yet Sophia smiled, unshaken. "Let the food speak," she whispered. In the audience, Grace clasped her hands, whispering silent prayers. Edward sat beside her, his eyes locked on Sophia, but his heart beat with another urgency, the truth that still hung unspoken between him and Grace. Unable to bear it anymore, he turned to her. "Grace, enough hiding. Please, tell me, she's my daughter, isn't she?" Grace's eyes filled, her breath trembling. For a moment she tried to hold the wall, but Sophia's small figure on the stage broke it down. Tears streamed freely as she whispered, "Yes, Edward, she's yours." Edward's chest tightened. 8 years of emptiness collapsed in that single word. He leaned back, his hand covering his face, overwhelmed. For the first time, he wasn't just watching a little girl on stage, he was watching his daughter. On stage, the bell rang. Sophia set down her plate of noodles, garnished simply with an egg and fresh herbs. The judges approached. They lifted forks, tasted, and paused. Silence gripped the arena, then the head judge spoke. "This dish is everything food should be. It is simple, yet profound. It speaks of roots, of home, of love. It is the taste of courage." The hall erupted in applause. Tears ran down Grace's cheeks. Edward rose to his feet, clapping with a pride so fierce it shook his voice. Sophia looked out into the audience and saw them, her mother and Edward side by side. She didn't understand all the words they had exchanged, but she felt it in her heart. Something had changed. Something had been healed. As the judges lifted her hand and declared her the winner, Sophia whispered softly to herself, "This is for Mummy. This is for Daddy. This is for us." And in that moment, the little street chef of Aja became more than a champion. She became the thread that stitched together a family, the light that turned pain into hope, and the child who taught an entire nation that the smallest flame can light the darkest room.